So back to the introductions. I think we'll start from the other side of the table and we'll have each of the panel members give their background. I've told them not to be humble because I'm not going to be humble, so please.
Sure. My name is Parag Vaish. Nice to meet you all. I've worked at a number of different companies in pretty much every industry. So I began my career at the Walt Disney Company working on live action movies, literally writing, rewriting scripts, hiring writers. This was Enemy of the State, Sixth Sense, Armageddon, if you remember any of those movies. This was back in '97. I went on to ESPN. At the time, the internet was just beginning, and we were trying to monetize ESPN.com and get people to pay for something. There was no such thing as advertising on the internet at the time, if you can believe that. From there, I went to Microsoft. I was in the MSN division as a product manager. First time as product manager, that was 2003. I went into a startup in the travel industry, was before Airbnb was cool. This was a software for vacation rental platform. From there, MSNBC, at a time when mobile apps were just beginning, so we made all the mistakes in the world building mobile apps across the different portfolio brands like Today Show, Rachel Maddow, Nightly News. From there, I led product at StubHub. That brought me to the Bay Area from Seattle. And so it was an awesome time to be at StubHub. We were moving to be a mobile company from a desktop company, so got a chance to partner with Google and Microsoft and Apple and everyone that was out there doing something in tech, because we're agnostic to all the companies. From there, I left to go lead digital at Tesla. That's the Cybertruck reference. So all of the digital platforms, in-vehicle, the retail stores, the mobile app, all of the design elements that go along with that. So wild and crazy window of time. It was 17 and 18 because we were very close to being out of business. From there, I left to go to Google and was a founder in residence. Got a chance to build a company from within Google for a couple of years. And what do you do after all of that? Right? You go into weapons detection using artificial intelligence. So that's what I'm doing now. I lead product at a company that does AI weapons detection. It's a publicly traded company. We've been around for 11 years. Customers would be Oracle Park, as you go to a baseball game, Wrigley Field, Dallas Cowboys. About half our business is schools and hospitals, and we're using AI to detect weapons. And unfortunately, it's a big problem in the US in particular. So I'll turn it over to Rahul, but nice to meet you all.
After his background, this is going to sound very monochromatic. I spent bulk of the last 2 decades working on enterprise or B2B SaaS. Currently, I support the product and the eng teams at Pindrop. It's a late-stage startup. We're into voice intelligence. We can listen to any audio and say whether it's synthetic, whether it's genuine, if it's genuine, who the user is it fraud, and so on and so forth, used by a lot of banks, and so on. Prior to Pindrop, I've had stints at Palo Alto Networks. I built out their cloud security business. Before that, I was at Facebook, trying to help Facebook get into the enterprise, and that didn't go so well. Before that, I was at Google. I spent nearly half a decade with then the Google Apps team, now the Workplace team, or the Workspace team, I guess. So I joined them when they were $300 million in revenue, took them to over $1 billion in revenue. Before that, I was at SAP, which is a European software company. I started my career in consulting. When, on the enterprise side, I work with the full spectrum of companies that are trying to sell to the very high end, companies that are selling to very small businesses, companies that have a PLG motion, companies that have a sales-led motion. From a stack perspective, productivity apps all the way to infrastructure and platform. But all this while, I've generally focused on enterprise SaaS. I've done almost every job in a tech company. I've run sales, I've run product, I've run I've run marketing, I've run partnerships, the full gamut. I mostly, as you can tell, work with large companies, except my last stint. But even with large companies, majority of my work has always been around starting something new or focusing on something which is not core. So that's my background.
Cool.
Hey folks, I'm Ibrahim Bashir. What can I tell you about myself? I think probably like a lot of you, I studied computer science in school, wanted to be a game developer, did not get a job as a game developer, so then just decided to be a software engineer. I used to work on radiology software at a hospital. I worked on e-commerce platforms. I was one of those engineers who was always asking, why are we building this? Who are we building this for? How do we know it's the right thing to build?
I know those kinds.
Yeah, and so I kept being told to stop asking questions. And so I realized being an IC engineer was not for me. and I hadn't quite discovered product yet. And so I took a career 180 and I went into consulting for a number of years. So I worked for Deloitte and Touche, crisscrossed the country solving really simple problems that got overly complicated, like company A buys company B and their databases don't talk to each other, and it's been 36 months, what's going on? And so solved a lot of those kinds of problems and realized a lot of it is organizational dynamics and communication and stakeholder management and things like that. So after 5 years of that, got frustrated with not really owning the experience and the product through and through, and really lasered in on product as what I wanted to do with my career. And I actually remember this moment, I was like, not only do I want to build products, I want to work on products that I'm really passionate about. So I made a really short list of products that I was going to work on, and it went the Kindle at Amazon, the Twitter application, and then Netflix. And I was like, I'm going to work at these companies one by one. And so I actually belligerently interviewed at Amazon, and I'm famous for actually turning down an Amazon offer with the merchant platform team and saying, I just want to work on the Kindle. So the recruiters had a good laugh. It took another 6 weeks, and then they finally introduced me to the Kindle team. So I actually was one of the very early PMs on the Kindle, worked on international expansion, worked on some hardware stuff, some accessory stuff, some on-device stuff, some retail store stuff, some online sales experience stuff. Just got a collection of experiences across the Amazon ecosystem. Was the PM of the first ads-based device, which was a new business model. Was the PM of the Kindle Fire tablet, if anybody remembers that. And then moved to the Bay Area and actually started working at Twitter, which was number 2 on my list. At Twitter, I was part of engineering, and I was on a PM team that really focused on the platform and infrastructure side of Twitter. So the problems at Twitter at the time, so I joined pre-IPO, were it's slow, it's not reliable, the fail whale was very famous, and so my charter was really performance, reliability, cost, and getting the infrastructure to a point where it could be bulletproof, which we did over the course of 5 years. So worked on a lot of really interesting stuff. If there's any feature you've ever wanted on Twitter, whether it's more than 140 characters or editable tweets, the infrastructure for all of it exists. Just didn't pull the trigger on the front end. So it was never a back-end problem. So did that for 5 years, and then I think it was around the time of was Twitter causing election chaos and what's going on with bots, and I really felt like I needed a break from ads-based revenue models, and I wanted to just do something where it's like, we build a product and if people like it, they pay us, and if they don't like it, they don't pay us. And so I kind of stumbled into B2B products that way. I was like looking for something cleaner and simpler. And because I had worked on so much infrastructure stuff at Twitter, and because at Amazon you have to kind of work on infrastructure stuff just to survive as a PM, I actually got an opportunity to be the GM of developer products at Box. So I actually was the product lead, but also dotted line managed sales, solutions consulting, marketing, professional services, developer relations, etc., and got to actually scale up a SaaS business from less than 10 million on a path to close to 100 million, which was a really interesting role, and then eventually ended up running all add-on products in Box's portfolio. So Box's cloud storage and everything around it, security, compliance, governance, workflow, developer, etc., ran most of the product and had a really good time, but CPO change always leads to change on your end. And so I kind of took stock of my career. I think it was 2020, and I was looking for something that would give me the strategic discipline of Amazon, the scaling experience of Twitter, and the B2B products of Box. And so I actually landed at Amplitude, where I still am, been there for 3.5 years, and that combined all those things for me. And the real icing on the cake was Amplitude is a product for product people to help make product decisions. And I spent a lot of time sort of writing, speaking, teaching, coaching about product management. So it was kind of a win-win where it's like everything I do outside of work leads to pipeline for the company, and working at the company creates legitimacy for everything I do. So that's my story. And for 3 years, I led the core analytics product at Amplitude. So whether you love it or hate it, that was me for 3 years. And then as of the last couple of months, we've grown into a multi-product company. And so I have a new role on the product leadership team where we're basically trying to expand the edges of the platform. So that looks like partnerships, that looks like acquisitions, that looks like internal incubation. So that's what I've been focused on.
Awesome. So I've been a product management leader for almost 23 years now, and my career is also split between large companies like Microsoft and startups. So for last 7-8 years, I've been in the startup world. I've founded 2 companies. Chisel is my second company. Before this, I founded a natural language processing company and sold it in 2 years. Prior to that, I worked for another startup as a VP of product, which was a machine learning company in the HR tech space. Before that, large company experience, Microsoft. My last job there was as the head of product in Office 365 team. So I led the Mountain View team over here. A bunch of products under that I worked, like the whole Outlook.com experience, the actual people experience in Outlook, Skype integration, all of those pieces of Outlook Office 365. Before that, I built the entire Windows App Store from the ground up at Microsoft, and in the early days, I was on the consumer side. So I did a lot of work, if you can call it work, on high definition Xbox playback. So watching a bunch of high def movies and games was daily job there. Yeah, and for last 4 years, I'm at Chisel. We founded the company during COVID in 2020, and then we launched our product in the market in 2021. In very simple terms, basically Chisel is a platform for product managers, which does two things. There are a lot of roadmap tools in the market, right? So the way we are different from these tools is that we are a two-in-one tool. We have feedback management in the same app where we have roadmaps. And so there is no disconnect between the customer discovery and customer needs when it comes to connecting every item to the roadmap tool itself. So we are two-in-one. And the second big differentiator we have is that we're doing a lot to push the agenda on automation, right? And so we push the boundary on scenarios like automatic PRD creation, automatic status report creations. And because we have the feedback and the roadmap system underneath that, it basically provides us that system of record on top of which AI can perform quite efficiently. So it's a little bit about myself. Cool. So let's jump into it. I think, the panel was asking me what's going to be the softball question, and I said there is no softball question. We are not going to waste time. We're going to jump right into it, right? And so I think we just have like 4 or 5 key meaty kind of discussions to have. I think my first question for the panel is that, everyone knows that emerging technologies like AI, etc., are going to change the way a lot of jobs are done, and in particular, it will also change the way product management job is done. Now, obviously, product management job is about a lot of things, right? Right from the customer discovery all the way to delivery and closing the loop of feedback with or validation with the customers. And so my first question is that if we look at those stages of product management, right? The very first stage is customer discovery. And so how do you guys think the process of customer discovery going to change with emerging technologies and AI?
Happy to start. So we happen to be a Chisel customer, so we're using the Chisel platform, and we have a new product launching in about a month. And what I've found the difference versus 5 years ago or 10 years ago is the speed and the breadth that you can cover with getting feedback from users. So we're have a product that we're building for college campuses, so we can be at hundreds of college campuses in an instance using the Chisel platform. We can automate the process of getting feedback and then feed that into a full roadmap process. So the rapid pace of getting that wide distribution gives us certainly the quality feedback, but it also gives us a really interesting lever to go to prospect customers and say, we've been testing at hundreds of universities. And so it turns into a lever for how do you win business just as well, because you have the breadth, you have the scale, and the depth of feedback, and it gives the impression that you're actually at hundreds of universities when you're really at a couple of dozen people at those universities, but still it gives us a lever, speaking startup language, to kind of fake it till you make it and say, at these universities. So I really very much appreciate the breadth because it turns into a revenue lever just as well.
So let me give you a very different perspective. Pin drop here in voice intelligence. Voice is fundamentally an ML problem. So we've been doing ML work for well over a decade. We have customer-specific ML models for almost every customer that we have and so on. But when it came to Gen AI and LLMs and copilots and all of those things, it took us 6 months before we could even start using any one of them in either engineering or product. And the reason for that is we are a biometric company selling to financial institutions. Financial institutions have a really long list of requirements that they have around use policy, and we had to put a use policy for Gen AI across the entire company before we could start using it. We still went ahead and did it because it was so important for us to do it. And I'm just curious, show of hands, how many of you currently use any Gen AI for any of your engineering or product management work? Yeah. So, the reason for us is, I think before even product management, what's very, very clear is the biggest impact that all of us are seeing is really on engineering. Depending on who you talk to, people talk about, productivity improvements of anywhere from 30 to 50%, at least in engineering. Product managers typically, at least in most startups, are fairly scarce resource. right? Most people would rather hire engineers before they hire a product manager. Ratios, are different, 1:10, 1:15, whatever you want to go. But now you take those 10 engineers, make them 50% more productive. The one PM that you had supporting that team is now, not even getting sleep. So that's the problem you really need to go solve. Now, in the B2B world, customer discovery is a little bit more, it's not a scale problem. You don't have to go talk to 1,000 people. You really need to have anywhere from 30, 40, maybe 50 really detailed, in-depth discovery sort of conversations or engagements with customers. For me personally, that's not where I would put the focus for something like Chisel in a B2B setup. The areas where I think you can get the biggest bang for the buck for productivity when it comes to B2B customer discovery is mostly in the customer outreach, which is more of a marketing function than product management function, which is figuring out who you want to get to. There are all sorts of ratios of you need to touch a customer 7 times before they'll come back and respond. So it's much more that side of things. But I can clearly see if you had a B2B product, even if it was for small and medium businesses, where you have thousands and thousands of customers, like we had at Google Apps, for example, their aggregation is a real problem, right? Aggregation of insights is a real problem. And wherever you have aggregation of insights is a problem, as a PM, you end up spending a lot of time trying to figure out what is the pattern, what is the signal from the noise. And I can clearly see, a lot of value there.
I'll build on what Parag and Rahul said, which is, I think in my experience, a lot of PMs end up not actually making product decisions. And that is, I think, the reason why most people get into product is like, I want to make decisions about where the direction of this product is going. And they actually spend a lot of time in just boilerplate stuff, right? Collecting feedback, scheduling meetings, collating feedback, trying to make sense of data. And so I think if what AI can do is basically simplify and level the playing field there so that it really just comes down to who is actually good at decision making, because now all the boilerplate stuff is gone. Because when I think about, especially at junior levels, when people sort of celebrate PMs, what they're actually celebrating is their organizational ability and their ability to get stuff done, even in a very chaotic environment. And if you can simplify all that chaos, then everybody gets a chance to actually make meaningful bets and try things in the product. So that's the part that's probably the most exciting for me is AI is just removing a lot of the tedium work out of the job so that we can actually focus on decision making. The other thing is, I think a lot of times customer discovery itself, as you scale, starts to become an interesting problem because you might find insights in different pockets and you don't really know which one to index on, right? And so I think that's a place where I haven't seen much from AI, but I think that's one where I would hope to see more gains is actually help me understand if I'm getting a signal on group X and a signal on group Y, which of these is more likely to become a core user over time, to be monetizable over time, et cetera, so you can actually prioritize feedback based on who it's coming from and their likelihood to evolve.
Very cool. I think just one piece to add to this, the one theme on customer discovery that we keep coming across again and again where customers are interested is essentially the automatic classification and insights generation from the feedback. A few customers have told us that they physically were not able to just do this analysis of every ticket of feedback, right? Because volume is very, very high. And so where AI kind of helps is if you can auto-classify those things, then the problem becomes manageable. That of 5,000 tickets I have, there are only 300. For example, if you're a bank, you say there are only 300 which are in the bill pay area. And now you can actually manage that 300 better if you're a bill pay PM, right? And so we've seen that come again and again in terms of how do we basically apply classification to a large set of feedback tickets.
So let me just build on what he said, and when I talk about Ibrahim, engineers are great, but it takes a lot of convincing for engineers to do stuff. And a lot of time, for a PM, oftentimes is not necessarily arriving at a decision, but bringing the rest of the crowd along, whether that's the rest of the engineering team, whether that is the rest of the cross-functional team. And there's much more effort you end up putting into that, because you need to convince people that the call you're making is the right call, it's based on the right data, it's the right supporting rationale, and so on and so forth. That's where I feel there's a lot of value that you can get from a tool like Chisel, because it simplifies it automates it, and you don't have to spend as much time. As a PM, in most cases, you have a pretty good feel as you go through the discovery as to what is the answer, what's the insight, what you want to build. But the effort of convincing everyone else that that's the right thing to do, that can be really, really painful.
Yeah.
That's actually a good switch to the second question I had, right? Which is, one part is customer discovery. The second part really is about, prioritization, right? And aligning the team and actually delivering what you promise. So when you guys think of that piece of a PM's job, or in general, how the discipline is going to evolve in the future, how technology is going to make a difference to that, what are some of the key things that come to your mind which make you feel excited that my job of prioritization and my job of actual delivery of these things are going to change because of emerging technologies, whether it is AI or any other kind of automation?
I'll happily be provocative on this answer. So if you think about Rahul's response just a moment ago, and Ibrahim's as well, there's stakeholder management is a key component of it, which means aligning other people to be part of the journey of the decision. I believe AI will cause for role compression. And so if the product manager has more time to make decisions or less to focus on the details, they can do more biz dev, more marketing, more product marketing, more something else where you need fewer people to align to. And therefore you've solved the problem of stakeholder management.
So I think he's onto something, because if you think about the simplest product execution, right? It's a founder CEO who knows a domain and is like, nobody say anything, I know exactly what to do. I know exactly what to do, I know how to market it, I know how to price it, I know how to message it. And then as the product evolves, all of a sudden it's like, well, we need 10x the people to do that, and it starts to get more and more complicated. So I think he's not wrong in that if you can compress it, you do actually increase the likelihood of product market fit more and more. And the part that I'm actually really excited about is there's too many product opportunities where you need to be a domain expert to even take a stab at it. And I think what AI and emerging technologies can do is flatten the learning curve a lot so that more people can apply product thinking from different disciplines to new disciplines. Like, I'll give you an example. I went to an event like this a couple of years pre-COVID, and I was sitting next to a guy who was, they basically were a farming startup. They're like, you can grow food in a vertical rack. And I was like, oh, are you a botanist? And he was like, no, I used to work on cooling systems at Tesla. And I was like, how did you go from this to this? He's like, it's a very similar problem. This is just a completely different domain. And so I always find those kinds of things fascinating, where it's like you learn something in one domain and you apply it to another domain, and that's the heart of innovation. And so I'm hoping this frees up brain cycles and incentivizes people to tackle different problems and innovate more.
Yeah. So I think your point about it enables people to tackle newer problems, shortens the learning cycle. I think that makes a lot of sense. I still feel in most companies, if you really look at what a PM does, it's really three things. One is figuring out what needs to be built. I think that in some ways is the easiest job. Second is convincing the engineers and the rest of the group this is the right thing to be built. I've worked with a lot of strongly opinionated engineers. You need to convince them so that they truly have the passion and the empathy. And then you've got to get your go-to-market engines and your sales teams to really go figure out how they're going to go sell this. And they will have hundreds of different things that they will want you to build into this that you will probably never have cycles to put into the roadmap. And that part of the problem is, when you talk to PMs, is stuff that most PMs don't enjoy doing. Right? It takes many more cycles than they frankly have to be able to tackle that. And that creates a lot of confusion and frustration on the other side, which is you launched something, you didn't really engage with us. You launched something, we had input and we couldn't really provide you input. I think simplifying that and making heroes out of PMs, in my mind, is we'll probably get to a stage where you'll need less people. But I think in the short term, just removing the friction from that entire process and making the entire product launch, the product prioritization process no longer a black box, but allowing many more, 10x the more people to be part of it and have visibility into it, it'll be a huge win for most companies.
Cool. So my last question for the panel, then I want to open up for the audience question, is that when you think about some of these changes coming, what would you, as a product leader, advise PMs who are earlier part in their career or mid part of their career and growing? What would you advise them to focus on? What would be your advice in terms of top 2-3 things that they should keep in mind to stay at the cutting edge of technology, other than just like learn about it? Yes, we all know that you can read some books and go to webinars, but what else can they do to actually stay at that and maintain the edge?
Let me go first. I think at the end of the day, the core skill set for a product manager really is, can you figure out what to build and can you help it get built? Right? Everything else is supporting functionality around it. And the more you can use tools to automate the supporting functionality, so you can go really focus on the core craft, because that's the stuff that gets the twinkle in the eye, that's what gets you passionate, that's why people stay up late at night doing stuff. So the more you can do that, the more satisfying it will be for you, and frankly, the more impactful it will be for your team.
Just a quick follow-on that answer. When they are trying to do that, how should they think about specific impact that changes in technology or the emerging technologies like AI or any other thing, like robotic process automation or any other field of AI, machine learning? Should they keep something specific in mind as they are trying to keep the eyes on what to build and how to get it built?
Yeah, so...
Or do you think the changes in technology are not going to change the job dramatically?
I think it's the same thing we tell our customers. It's not the technology, right? It is, how you end up using it. So, to some extent, ML has been around for a long time. These things have been around. I think what's really changing now is the way they are being adopted by applications like Chisel and making life easy for people. So I think there's a part of it which is all of us have to do all the time, which is you've got to stay current with what's really happening in the market. Yeah. But besides that, in terms of what you do day in, day out, my daughter's in the room and she's going to be an intern as a PM. And my advice to her is focus on the core craft. And the more time you can give to yourself focusing on the core craft and not getting distracted by everything else that needs to happen, the more time you have to develop yourself.
Anyone else in the panel have a counter opinion?
I actually do have a counter opinion, and I know people are going to think it's a very privileged answer, but it's a conclusion I came to slowly over the course of my career, which is it's a fallacy to try to get your one day job to give you all the learning you need as a product person. It's just not going to happen, and it actually leads to some strange behavior, which is you start pushing certain technologies at work because you're like, I need to get this on my resume, and it just doesn't make any sense for your product. And so my counterintuitive opinion is actually you need to have a portfolio of product management every step of your career. And younger people I've seen who are doing product management operate this way. They're like, oh, I do a little bit of angel investing, I advise on this, I'm building a thing here. And I used to be like, where do you get the time for this? And then when you actually add it up, you're like, we actually spend like 120% of our time on our day job, right? And I think if you could say, actually, I'm going to spend 95% on my day job and dabble and try things, I think it's going to lead to much better rounded product managers. And I think if everybody starts doing it, it'll force employers to be like, look, we got to give you time to hack, but it doesn't always have to be work related.
But literally 95% of what I was about to say is what Abraham just said. The term intellectual curiosity comes to mind as the single attribute I look for in product managers. And the best way to exhibit that is to do something outside of your core role at work, because you're going to get limited exposure to the full breadth of capabilities as the world evolves. Your company will evolve in its linear path in that industry, in that space, but the technology world will have a far wider breadth. And so the hands-on application outside of your day job is where a lot of the learning comes from. It makes you more interesting as a candidate. It gives you more interesting topics at dinner parties. It's where a lot of the learning happens. So when you expand outside of your job, that's where you start to accelerate your career.
I want to add some context here, mostly from what I've actually seen from the market and what customers have showed me. I've had situations where, a corporate VP for a very, very large company, right? Everyone knows me. She literally showed me that, look, these are the prompts that I'm actually giving to just write a PRD. I gave a whole talk to my team over here, how we can use this. She just did that. She spent 2-3 hours and sent out the whole memo to the team saying, look, here's how you guys should be using this stuff. It is so fast, right? Not only that, even when I've talked with some of the actual PMs who were doing the work, they have actually said that, Praful, if I wanted to write a spec on sign-up, it used to take me 4 or 5 days and the spec won't be ready for 4 or 5 days. Today what I'm doing is I'm using, you pick your favorite tool, right? They use some kind of tool, it gets them to 80% of the way, and now they have a lot of time. They are now using time to actually focus on the key decisions rather than writing the basic use cases which have been written for a sign-up experience for more than 20 years now in the market, right? So it's really sharpening where they are spending their time. In fact, to that point, I was just talking to someone here and they actually built the PRD application themselves and they are using it just for themselves, not for anything else, right? And so there are so many ways PMs are already trying to get an advantage here, and mostly it is just to save their own time, right? And be able to focus on things that really matter most. So I think that one thing which I kind of continue to believe is that it will free up so much time of PMs, right? It will reduce busy work and allow you to sharpen your attention only on things that really matter: customers, revenue, winning the market, right? Cool. I want to open it up for the audience.
So with all this conversation about AI and how it can be used for product management, how does a tool like Chisel help future-proof your strategy and your roadmap by, for example, helping you look into different scenarios that could happen? The market being so volatile, the distraction, attention span being so short. You have a dynamic space where machine learning and AI is switching attention to one part or the other. How does this tool help me figure out a dynamic way to update my roadmap, following both market trends and using information such as the segmentation and classification features that teach me what users are driving the use, who's really driving this, and what do they need, and how I use that to inform my roadmaps and keep them dynamic. Being future-proof, no matter what happens, I will have a roadmap there.
I'm happy to give you a perspective, but
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the future-proof reference is where the human actually still matters quite a bit. And that's where you've got to read the market to then be able to seek out feedback from different audiences, possibly different than you had targeted originally. And so having that recognition that you need to go after a different segment to get feedback from those users, you can use Chisel as an enabler to get that feedback. But you have to have the human who understands that there's a possibility that you expand your range beyond what you had originally targeted. If you think about that, what's that cup that everybody got crazed about?
Stanley.
The Stanley Cup, right? So the initial market was the construction workers or whatever it was, and then they figured out that there was this wider audience. If you can take your product person or whoever's in charge and say, well, what if we made different colors? What if we got after this different market and triggered this whole craze around it? Then you use the Chisel levers that you have in the tool set to be able to go seek out that feedback and validate it more quickly than you can on your own. So I think it's one of those unusual instances when we think about AI so much where the human actually matters quite a bit to be able to expand and then use the tools accordingly.
I think what tools like Chisel or Chisel in particular can do is make it really easy for those signals to be right in front of your eyes. And you can't miss it, right? For example, all the signals that we derive from customer feedback or from different systems of records like Salesforce or your CRM system or your support system, etc. Those signals will be right in front of you, in addition, like in front of every roadmap item. So then it's up to you. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to work really hard to extract. It's all there right in front of you. Now it's about, as Parag said, your decision making. Anyone? Any other questions?
Yeah, I think I would like to add more.
Yes.
So I think recently one of my friends asked, he just joined as a VP of product in one of the startups. His thing was like, we have two products. The API product is the most used, and that's where we're making revenue. But at the same time, the UX product is used very less, and I think it's not making that much money. And they sell it on a license base. I tried to give some advice to them. Then I thought, let me see actually if I'm thinking different or not. So I just put out the same, whatever answer I gave it to him, I put it in the chat GPT, gives same thing. But to Parag's point, that's where human comes into the picture. And the same thing, I asked him, think like a product manager, but first think, after these two, you figure out the revenue models for these two, try to think about cannibalizing your own product. Because if you are not thinking about your competition, you are thinking about it. When you start thinking about destroying your own product, you'll find a lot of gaps where I think you can figure it out. That part, a ChatGPT couldn't give it because it's trained on that model because nobody has given that idea to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So that's where the human factor comes in because once, as Ibrahim said, free up yourself. You have most of your trivial work by using the tools, and that remaining 80% of the time you put on the 20% of that idea. So that would make the differentiator.
Cool. Yeah. Please.
Yeah, so as you all have come through your careers as LEPMs, you had issues that you faced, whether it was being thrown down the paperwork rabbit hole or continuous stakeholder management or just iterating continuously on your projects. Now that you're leading teams, how are you helping your teams not go into the same problems that you faced, and even better if you're doing it with Chisel?
So I'm not doing it with Chisel yet. But I would say I have an overriding philosophy, and it's the Amazon in me, because that was my first product role, which is I think there's a desire in a lot of PMs today to scope the problem down to the product surface that they own, quote unquote. They're like, I own this tab or this panel or this page, and the customer experience is not confined to that. Like the customer got there through a series of interesting events, how they discovered your product, how they bought your product, their prior experience with your product, the page before your product. And so my philosophy, and what I encourage my PMs to always do, is say, I would rather you understand the entire user journey and the customer journey, all the way to docs and sales and support and all that, and be less detailed on the piece that you own versus going super deep on that. Because from a customer perspective, it's Conway's Law, right? It's like, I don't really care that you own this and they own that. I care that this is the entire portfolio that I'm interacting with. And so I think, to answer both parts of your question, the thing I encourage my team to do, and the thing I think that ultimately helped me evolve from an individual to a lead to a manager to an executive, is actually thinking about the customer experience holistically and not listening to anybody who would say, well, that's not product's job or that's not this product team's job, right?
In fact, just add to this, a very interesting this thing is that a lot of PMs sometimes think feedback is only feedback if we got it, if I was involved personally in collecting it from the customer. The feedback is available in so many places, right? Customer is speaking to you. In fact, we have Iran in the room with us. He's the EVP of Gong. And we were having this conversation the other day that, like Gong is recording so much of the customer feedback already, or prospect feedback, even more important, right? Like these are the people you're trying to sell to in many cases when you're having sales conversations. And so Gong has all these things captured. They are there, right? There was a time when AI-based summarization was not available, now it is. But tools like us can integrate that and pull all that into the view of a PM, where the PM is no longer tunnel visioned about, hey, I didn't talk to the customer, so this is not feedback. No, this customer has been talking to your sales guy for such a long time that they have the best feedback possible.
I just want to add one more thing. I have a good friend who has a very unique job title. He's like Chief Escalation Officer at a product company, and he has had that type of job for that same CPO at multiple companies. And he always tells me this thing. He's like, no PM wants to hear this, but he's like, I would rather remove 80% of the features on your roadmap and just fix your documentation and your demo, and it would solve like 80% of your problem. But no PM wants to hear that, right? Because it's very career jeopardizing. And so it's just something to keep in mind, is if the problems are that obvious and out there, you're not accessing them or you're not internalizing.
I think this is the feature factory disease, right? Like a lot of PMs unfortunately think that unless they create new features, they are not worth their thing. You don't need to create a feature factory. You could just have one winner, and that kind of gets you to your goals.
So Praful, just to jump on that one, so I've done marketing companies, and so I'm sort of the receiver.
Just to put some color on that, Tapan was the Chief Marketing Officer for Product Board. And Product Board is one of the tools in the PM this thing, right? So he knows a little bit about what he is.
Well, this question is best to like, I'm just more curious. So when I interface with product managers, the product managers often get lost in features. So they're just spinning in features, and I think oftentimes there is an opportunity, whether you're on the sales side, marketing side, or support side, to articulate the story on what you're building, why you're building, how you're going to help customers. And it's hard for a person on that side to go into the in-depth PRDs and kind of comb their way through, right? And so I was curious about your thoughts on using, like, let's say AI, right, as a means to do the other parts of a PM's job, which is a really important job, interface with go-to-market teams as well as interfacing with the customer support team. Like I was at Rapport most recently, which does entertainment payroll, and half the time the PMs are working with large customers, whether it's Netflix, Disney, or something like that, right? So anyway, I was just curious. I know we talk a lot about building. I'm talking about the interface aspects of the function.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the biggest pain points right now for a lot of product managers typically tends to be all the questions you get asked by sales or customer success or marketing, and majority of those questions are frankly the same questions, right? They get asked the same questions over and over again, and I actually had someone on my team keep track of the number of times the same questions were asked, because that basically means enablement is broken, right? So, look, I 100% agree with what you're saying, which is a lot of our time as PMs is really spent on things that are non-core to the craft of building great products, but it is still extremely important to making the product successful. So without that, your product will not be successful. Even if you were to take a PRD, right? A PRD at the end of the day, while it has some element of the market and the user story, it is still geared a lot towards engineers. How do you create a summary of a PRD and send that snippet to all your customer support people and say, give me feedback?
I want to answer his question and connect to what you said, but I love movie references, so I'll give you guys a movie reference. If nobody ever has seen this movie, In Good Company, it's like 20 years old. It's Topher Grace and Dennis Quaid. And Dennis Quaid is like a magazine ad salesman, and he gets like MBA'd, like his boss is like 20 years old, and he's like 50 years old, and this guy's preaching to him about how to do it. And at some point, some company buys their company, and this guy's giving a big speech, and they sell ads in magazine. And he's like, a child wakes up in Malaysia and decides to buy cereal. And he just keeps saying like nonsensical things, and the guy raises his hand and he's like, I thought we sold magazines. Like, that's what we did. And I don't understand what you're talking about. And I think to answer your question, like a lot of times everybody's so obsessed with like, how is this new and shiny and take advantage? And I'm like, your core product and motion and ICP is already established. So 99% of the time, that's what you should be talking about. As sales, as marketing, as enablement, and as product is like, how does this enhance the thing that already works? If your thing is a whole new thing, it's actually not layering into what you already have, right? So I push that a lot. It's like, unless we're explicitly trying to build a new business, you should talk about connecting to the existing business as much as possible. And that reduces the cognitive load on everybody to try to understand the thing.
It's that, and I think it's just almost getting to the essence of what problem are we solving. Oftentimes, I feel like I have to extract that out. You've internalized it as PMs, but anyway, I think that makes sense.
I'll offer one perspective. Your question is about like interface with marketing or other team members from the product perspective. So I've got a product that is very early stage, and the product manager is not unlikely to get resourced from other departments in the team, in the company. So PR and product marketing, whatever, they're gonna be busy with other stuff. So instead of having this person just feel deficient and under-resourced, I just told them they have no resources. Okay, nobody else is going to support you. You're the only person who's going to make this product successful. Go find the AI tool that'll do the job of the department that's not supporting you. And the moment you pivot your thinking to AI can probably solve this, when you defer to AI as the solution, you're going to find a plethora of tools out there. So this product manager now posture is very different. It's not deficiency, it's opportunity. That's the first big shift. Then once they got there, they found 20 tools for PR that get them 85% the way there. And they found dozens of tools for sales enablement and video management, all kinds of other stuff. So it's about shifting your thinking as a product person and then seizing the opportunity that's put in front of you, even if it means resource deprivation.
To add to that, how far do you think we are from a future that 1 PM is single-handedly running
It's the day before. I think Sam Altman said, $1 billion company with one person. I think you're talking about the day before that happens.
Sherry, you had a question, and then there's a question there.
So that picture itself is really relevant to the question that I was going to ask. So kind of shifting gears a little bit. I think we talk about productivity, we talk about feature, talk about stakeholder management at the execution level. If we zoom out and think about product vision and product strategy, a very important part of the product management or chief product officer's job is really to anticipate, right? Anticipate the future market trends, not only just to listen to the feedback of today, and also anticipate your competitors' move and where your potential competitors could come from. Because a lot of times they could come from different fields. I was interning at Ford when I was in college, and I remember I was developing the product roadmap for navigators, right? The navigation system in the car. I mean, how funny is that? Like right now, everybody has this. And then also, if you think about the last wave of OpenAI, just totally wiped out a lot of startups with shiny product roadmaps. So really, the question is, how do you build product moat? Just given how fast the landscape is changing as chief product officers, how do you anticipate? What are some of the good practices you've seen?
I think if you read like business strategy books, there's a few tried and true techniques to building moats, right? And so I think if you have a product insight and if you can get enough champions on your side or enough market share, or you sort of control a persona. Those are all classic modes, right? Community is a classic mode. So I think there's a bunch of different modes. I think what's more interesting than how to get the initial mode is how to maintain it. And I think where a lot of companies fall apart, and this is the root of innovators' dilemma, is their moat and their differentiation starts to fade, and they don't translate it into something else, right? I think that's where things fall apart. And so to me, it's like, if you have a successful product, if you've made X in revenue or you have Y in users, you have a somewhat successful product, you need to do some hard thinking about what is it that helped us get traction, and how do I actually double down on it? And if it's a fleeting differentiator, how do I actually turn it into something that can be everlasting, right? So I'll give you a simple example. I teach a class, and one of the case studies we use is GitHub. So GitHub gets like almost every developer on earth using GitHub by saying you have free repos, right? Now, eventually repos become cheap enough that everybody can offer free repos. So you don't actually have free repos as a differentiator anymore. But what GitHub managed to do is they managed to become sort of top of mind for every developer, to be like, the free repo leads you to putting your code on there, and now that's how you do collaborative development, right? They have a huge community now. And so they had a short-term differentiator in free storage, and they were smart enough to be like, if I play my cards right, I can actually get enough of a community that's going to be hard to displace. So even if you come along with more storage, cheaper storage, you're not going to break this community, right? And so I think that's what most product people and most companies don't think about, is what is actually a lasting differentiator we have, and how can we capitalize on it for the long term.
Iran, you had a question?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is often overlooked is most teams and most companies are going to grow, let's say, over 100 people. The silent killer of every team is, we could call it org design, roles and responsibilities. So I wonder how you think about this. My thesis is that AI would make the people aspect and those org design aspects even more important than today, because the difference, the competitive advantage of PMA versus PMB is going to be a lot more on the personal side, because the tools are going to be so much better that the drudgery that some people do today in half a day and now they'll take 2 weeks, that's not going to be such a big differentiator. So I wonder how you think about that as you think about scaling teams in this new era where AI makes things easier, but they don't really solve the human piece.
You know, I don't know if I have a good answer, but I think the fundamentals of where we are today seems to still apply, and maybe at some point they'll break, but I don't know when they'll break for me. So, you know, the basics tend to be, do you have clear ownership around how you will have an impact on the customer's journey, customer's experience, and do you have a team that can execute against that? And so I don't have an answer for you as to how AI will drive it. I do have an answer in today's environment. How do you go from 100 to 500 to 1,000? Because that is a real problem even today. And I think to a great extent that problem doesn't really go away. And you know, teams struggle with that because I think you referred to this, which is the interdependency between teams really grows. The way you plan products then has to fundamentally change. You have to do a lot more horse trading on, I need to get this feature, but this feature needs these 3 teams to support. How do I get them to prioritize and so on? So I think a lot of those things don't really change in my opinion. There might be new things that we'll have to worry about, but I think if we can solve for what we already know needs to be solved for, I think we'll be in a decent spot.
I'll offer one perspective that's from Elon at Tesla, which is flat organization. So no person is more than 2 people away from the CEO. This is a multi-tens of thousands person company, but he strives for that. Second is artificial deadlines. Keeps people focused. Completely artificial. Everything's 1 day or 1 week. That's it. There's no other long-term projects. 1 day or 1 week. Third is removing people from meetings. No meeting needs to be more than some number and some number of minutes. And it goes to what Rahul was saying, is those are fundamentals. Those are independent of AI. That could have been an answer 5 years ago. You know, but I think they're actually still, there's elements of those that make sense. Not holistically. Tesla's chaotic for a variety of reasons, but there's elements that are keeping the administrative burden
Do you agree
down.
that this aspect would become even more important because AI would level the playing field on a lot of other aspects, or do you think it's going to be the same?
I think it'll simplify things because, again, the fewer people, the role compression point from earlier, fewer people need to align. So you have flatter, more efficient decision making. So AI is an enabler for that.
I actually don't know if I share the same kind of thought process, right? Because I think I'm somewhat in your camp. I think what's going to happen, like you see today, imagine a particular PM, right? Today, the difference between PM A and PM B is not necessarily just judgment or intuition. There is a lot of other stuff which is mechanical. This guy can write really fast. This girl, she can actually document requirements. There is a bunch of stuff which is mechanical, which can be replaced by AI. So now what happens is, the way you differentiate between PM A and PM B essentially boils down to creativity, intuition, or just pure judgment, right? Very, very soft, intangible kind of skills. If you extend this, it gets even worse. Like imagine a PM who's kind of decent at marketing, or vice versa, a marketing peer who's kind of decent at the product management job. Now both of them, given the right tool sets, the difference in their skill set is really zero at that point, right? There is no advantage of one person having a lot of experience versus another, right? So this can, I personally think this will make things a little more challenging because it is uncharted water. To your example, if you tell your PM that, hey, you know what, go find the best PR tool, best marketing tool, that person goes and starts doing this, they step over 3 other people's toes. Whether for right or wrong, that's going to create a churn in the organization and some chaos in the organization. And I don't know that we know what that effect is going to be, right? Or what are the parts which are going to get more amplified, and how is it going to break, right?
So I have yet a different opinion on this, and maybe this is not the question you were asking, but I think all these solutions of like kill meetings or like flatten the org, I'm like, it's a hammer looking for nails, and I think one of the most distasteful things I find is when a leader comes in and says, this is how we used to do it at this company, now we're going to do it here, and I'm like, but this is not that company, so it doesn't really make any sense. And so to me, what AI can help do is, I think the problems these solutions are trying to solve is, one is drift, and then 2 is thrash, right? It's like the leaders get in the room and they're like, this is the market, this is the problem, this is the solution, let's go. And then once it gets out there, the message gets obfuscated, and then politics kicks in, and there's horse trading and all this stuff. And what AI can do is basically show you how much you're deviating from your documented strategy and execution plan versus what's really happening, because it should be able to analyze everything that's happening in the org. All the slide decks that are created, all the PRDs that are written, all the Jira tickets that are moved, and how fast they're moving. And so I think that's where AI is going to be really handy. Your strategy is sound, but your execution is boring, right? Or your strategy has never made any sense anyway. And then you don't have to play these games of org design. You can just be like, oh, we're drifting because this is not staffed, or the wrong person is on this project, or things like that.
Sorry, just to wrap up this, what is your intuition on this? I'm curious.
I don't know if I have an answer to my question, but my observation over leading product team, go-to-market teams, operational teams, that I think more and more the reason some companies succeed and some not is more attributed to how they're set up than the people they are.
Understood, yeah. Okay, just 1 second. We are way past our panel time, so we will take 2 last questions, and then we can mingle. Obviously, we'll be here, but we'll at least some of the panel members they have a hard stop. So 2 more questions, and then we'll stop. There are too many hands.
I don't have a question really. I have a hypothesis on the previous question, which is I think it depends based on the level of PM or the seniority of the PM. I think you're going to see a lot more of that leveling at like the entry level PMs. Right, where you don't need that much intuition in terms of like where to take the product or what the trends for the market are. But as you go up the ladder, I think that's going to become a differentiator, and PMs can choose like where they want to invest their time or what skills they want to add on, right? So you could have PMs who become like PM go-to-market people, PMs who are like PM plus tech people, right? Like I think that's going to be the evolution. That's my hypothesis.
Cool, go ahead.
So since this was about the future of product management, I think the CPO function didn't exist, say 25 years ago, and then we're in the age of AI. So my question is, where are we going from here? Are certain functions merging? Like you talked about product marketing and management, especially maybe in the same B2B scenario. Are certain functions merging with product management? And then the second question is the future of product management itself, right? I know certain companies, they got rid of all PMs saying, I don't need PMs anymore. So where are we headed towards, like given these kind of different trends? Merge versus, getting rid.
If you look at any large tech company on the B2B side, and you look at which jobs constitute majority of the people, really 2 jobs that constitute majority of the people: sales
Engineering.
or engineering, right? So either you're building something or you're selling something. And I think everything else, and if you look at staffing ratios, all staffing ratios are based on either of those two numbers. And those are the real physical activities that need to happen. I don't yet know how AI will impact sellers, because I think sales is still a very much human. For a class of product, PLG things are different, but for most enterprise sales, those are still very classic, people-driven. I haven't seen quotas grow exponentially yet. Maybe they will at some point, but they're not so far. Engineering, I think you're already seeing productivity improvements. It's pretty clear you can get much more work done with fewer people. I think everything in the middle, whether it's product management, product marketing, program management, I think those things will mush, and you'll get a lot of bang for the buck through AI tools like Chisel and others.
I would plus one what Rahul is saying. I think there's going to be a head of building things and a head of selling things. Now, whether head of building things is called CPO, CTO, CMO, I'm not sure, but I think ultimately you'll have one person on.
Not CMO, come on.
I think
CMO is not building things.
I think if you get outside the Bay Area, you will find, interestingly, a lot of the digital product is owned by the CMO.
There's somebody who spoke at South by Southwest, and he had this term creative generalist. And basically it said combination of multiple roles, but it's the individual who's able to use the tools accordingly at their disposal. So the person who has the range and the fungibility to be able to say, let me go figure out what a biz dev deal might look like with this company. Let me go figure out what the legal restrictions are for going into this space. You can use the tools to do such a thing. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need a biz dev person. You can go do it yourself these days. So that person who has the creative ability to be able to use the tools is the one who's going to lead things, whether that, again, is the product person or chief building officer, whatever it may be.
Or the CMO.
Yeah, I think
there are some tech companies where the CMO is the better, and that's the problem with those companies typically.
I'm not advocating for it, I'm just saying it happens.
I know what you're saying.
I think just one little thing to add to this is, I think sometimes people get confused between a task or a function versus title. I think a lot of this nonsense about PM role is going away is about titles. We still need to decide what are we building. We still need to decide how do we prioritize. We still need to decide who's our customer, right? So these functions have to be done by someone, whether you name them product managers or whether you mix some stuff and say, I have this new role, it doesn't matter. In fact, even today, many large companies have same function being performed by people whose title is not the same. Right, so it's just like we need to kind of differentiate that. Hey, I just want to Parag, Rahul, and Ibrahim, thank you so much for coming over here, and all of the participants as well.